all schoolboys together at Charterhouse Public School. When they started out, the band got a lot of stick for being posh pop stars, but in the swinging 60s, Charterhouse was a bastion of Victorian morality and imperial values. The fag system in the competing schoolhouses kept the youngest kids in their place, but the players in Genesis found escape and rebellion in music. Even within the cloistered walls of Charterhouse, something of the psychedelic 60s filtered in.
There was the one piano in this house, and as soon as class was finished, there would be a scramble to occupy it. You could sometimes reserve it, but often it was just a free-for-all. So I used to crawl through the food hatch sometimes to see if I could beat the others.
Peter and I in particular used to play together. We used to play old soul numbers in the main, Otis Redding stuff, Wilson Pickett, things like Benny King. And I don't know, I always thought Pete had a great voice for that kind of material. I mean, he always wanted to play the piano as well, actually, but I managed to get there first, so I did that.
Am I very wrong to hide behind the glare from an open mind and stare?
And there was a strange character called Peter Gabriel, who was a very placid, very, very ordinary, very quite normal chap who would just suddenly jump on tables and start singing, which is quite out of character. He was a drummer, in fact, to start with. People don't realise this, but in fact, he lent the anon of our first... he used to let us borrow his drums, and he used to come along and look extremely nervous.
My drums were my pride and joy, when I was a teenager. It's very strange because the bass drum from that kit, I've just pulled out again, and it's a small bass drum. Has a really great, very hip sound. We started writing songs, and I would write with Tony and Mike and Ant were in another band writing called The Anon, and we'd get together for different sessions, and I think, whenever you start playing music as a teenager, you still stand in front of the mirror and imagine a huge audience or whatever, all the fantasies are there.
As daybreak breaks the mist upon the earth, it came to pass, the beauty settled there forevermore. And as the steam clings close to things to come, it came to pass that solid rock did part for humble life. Once upon a time there was confusion, disappointment.
After Baden-Powell, the most famous Charterhouse old boy was pop picker Jonathan King. His chart success annoyed the teachers, but inspired the boys.
I'd returned to my old school for Old Boys' Day, and this young sprout, who was probably there when I was there, but I'd never remember seeing him in my life, thrust this grubby tape into my... Driving back home, I listened to it, and I thought it was really good. There were some interesting songs, and I loved the guy's voice, the lead vocalist's voice. So I called them up and said, what's the name of the band? And they said, well, we don't have one yet.
His first suggestion was Gabriel's Angels, which I liked, but the rest of the band somehow seemed to miss.
Energised by the support of their hero, a real professional, the Genesis schoolboys signed a publishing deal with King's Company and began enthusiastically songwriting and recording demos.
That was a good, exciting moment, and in fact, then we started to send in demos, which he was less impressed with, and we wanted to get an album made, and so I remember he was totally obsessed with the Bee Gees at the time. So we tried to steer one with a slight Bee Gee tinge to it.
Genesis' first single, Silent Sun, a pastiche of the Bee Gees sound, suited King's pop sensibility and created a bit of a stir. There was a stir in the drum department too. Genesis have had more drummers than you can shake a stick at, and the first of the many lineup changes came when drummer Chris Stewart was replaced by their friend John Silver.
The silent sun that never shines. She is the warmth of my lonely heart. The motion of a turning wheel. Can't you stop it and look like the nest I'll build alone? One day I'll come to you and call you to my side. One day I'll take you from the bottom of our lives. One day we'll fly away to the kingdom of my dreams. One day I'll find myself wrapped in my we're waiting for you. Come and join us now. We need you with us. Come and join us now.
King's concept for the album, The Entire History of the Universe on 12 vinyl inches, was ambitious stuff. Unfortunately, the album wound up selling just 650 copies. It didn't help that Genesis to Revelation was all too often filed in the religious section of record shops. In retrospect, a slow build-up to stardom was no bad thing, but at the time it was a disappointment that led to some soul-searching and eventually to Genesis and Jonathan King going their separate ways.
We're waiting for you. Come and join us now. We need you with us. Come and join us now. Look inside your mind. See the darkness.
Looking back, I mean, to make a few record now, a single or a few tracks is not a big deal. In those days, to make an album for a bunch of guys who were at school, sort of 15, 16, 17, and couldn't really play very well, to go in and get a record deal, it was only 3 days to make the album, was actually quite an achievement.
I had this brilliant idea to call it From Genesis to Revelation and not have an artist name on it. This was a terrible mistake because it got bumped in the religious bin of all the record shops and nobody ever heard it.
I think a lot of his influence was good. I mean, there's no doubt that some of the tracks we were doing were unwieldy and too naive, but nevertheless, I think that he wanted to turn us into too much of a poppy outfit.
I think From Genesis to Revelation was a kind of bit of a false start for the band. It didn't sell well, and it felt very much like they hadn't quite found their sound.
Genesis to Revelation, which is kind of masterminded by King, is very different from certainly what we consider classic Genesis, i.e. the Peter Gabriel lineup, sound like. The album has this harmonious pop vibe to it, which is very uncharacteristic of what will follow.
The debut, like a lot of bands, was sort of feeling about a bit and just kind of copying.
I guess I'm doing that.
The guys' days at Charterhouse had ended, and it was a time for commitment. Drummer John Silver left and was replaced by John Mayhew, their first recruit from the ads at the back of Melody Maker, which were a crucial notice board for musos. They spent the autumn of 1969 playing their first gigs at youth clubs and colleges, and then retreated to get it together in the country, writing their bolder second album, Trespass, in a cottage in Dorking. Now Genesis really began revving up. Their favourite venue was Friars in Aylesbury. This progressive club became a showcase for a whole new generation of bands who were breaking away from the Beatles, away from the hippie vibe of the 60s. Acts like Yes, ELP, Van der Graaf Generator, and others of this new heavy generation were forging what began as art rock and grew into progressive rock. It's typified by long, complex, highly arranged numbers, introspective tracks to think to, not dance to.
Like your first lover or something, it's something you remember well when someone actually likes what you're doing and responds very well to it. And although we'd had good gigs in other places, that was really the first place that adopted us. So, yeah, I mean, it was many good memories.
In 1970, Genesis signed to Tony Stratton Smith's Charisma Records. He paid the band a wage of £10 per week and took a very close interest in their career, encouraging Genesis to develop their live act.
Tell me my life is about to begin. Tell me that I'm a hero.
By the time we came around to doing Trespass, the second album, we'd done a certain amount of live playing, and we'd written loads and loads of material, and the whole idea of the band had completely transformed from being a band that was trying to have a hit single to a band that was trying to do something adventurous musically.
With a new professionalism and a proper record deal with manager Tony Stratton Smith's Charisma label, it seemed like Genesis were well set up, but the music they made was constantly exploring and asking questions, and so were the guys in the band. There would be many more changes before Genesis became the name everyone knows today.
Standing in a forest, gazing at the sun, looking at the trees, but there's not even one. See a rippling stream with smiles and then goes by. Run to feel its comfort, but the water's dry. I see her face and run to take her hand. Why she's never there, I just don't understand. The trumpet sound, my whole world crumbles down. Visions of angels all around, dance in the sky, leaving me here forever goodbye. As the leaves will crumble, so will fall my love. For the fragile beauty of our lives must fade. Though I once remember echoes of my youth, now I sense no past, no love that ends in love. Take this dream, the stars are filled with light, as the blossom glides like snowflakes from the trees, in vengeance to a God no one can reach. Visions of angels all around, dance in the sky, leaving me here forever goodbye. Today, the rent sky tells his tale, but the only listening eyes are mine.
Stagnation, that was a journey song, as I call it, you know, that you didn't follow the normal verse, chorus, sort of structures, but you went on through a series of landscapes, and I think right from the word go, that was something that interested me, and it continues to interest me in sort of stuff that I do. I mean, more often now it's sort of film work than film soundtrack stuff, but I love that, and I think some of my favorite pieces of music are when I, as a listener, get taken into different worlds made out of sound, and if there are some things that you've not encountered before, or blends that you haven't met before, then it pays off even better for me. So I think that's what we were aspiring to, and that's, I think, one of the tracks that did that, and I think that was probably one of the most band-composed tracks on the record.
There still is time for washing in the pool. Wash away the past. Moon, my long-lost friend, is smiling.
Well, the Knife used to be known as the Nice because we were big fans of the Nice, and I'd sat around. There was an energy. The Nice, people, not many people know much of their work nowadays, but it was what actually drew us into Tony Stratton Smith. And although Keith Emerson was associated with some of the sort of more extreme departures of prog rock on the keyboard, then it was a sort of hip underground band that Hendrix wanted to join. Now people forget that, but they were amazing. It was powerful. It was sort of inventive, driving. I mean, maybe Soundgarden might be a sort of modern day, well, latter day reference. And obviously Emerson was a great performer. He used to sort of rock forward and back with the Knife. And I was thinking, and there we would be, sitting on stools, twiddling away at 12 strings, and you'd think, where's the balls in this? Let's get something with a bit of energy and a bit of something a little dangerous. So we didn't have anything like that, so I started to try and write something that would have that energy, and that's really how things began. And then Tony added a section to it, and obviously the keyboard thing at the end. But I think it was the first sort of peak of a darker energy that we discovered, if you like.
Down.
I think it was a good start. There was definitely a personality that was different to other bands and prog bands at the time. So it was the first thing, I think, to set us apart. And we had, I think, some minor success in Belgium, which felt like conquering the world at the time. I think we wanted to develop it. I think we wanted to get more energy into it, more a darker feel too. And
expand, if you like, the horizons of the musical world that we were living in. So things were beginning to work live, you know, in one or two clubs around there, and I think Friars was a key one, and Angel Godalming, and then Newcastle, I mean Glasgow. It was quite strange because, you know, we seemed to get through in sort of southern Europe, and then tougher working class cities, and it was a sort of strange balance, and it was harder for us, you know, in the sort of more cliquey, cultured world of London and some of the big cities.
I started getting bad stage fright, which sort of came from nowhere, really. I mean, I'd started off by being pretty confident. In fact, at the start, Peter was the one that used to be really quite... I mean, it seems extraordinary to think at one stage that one of the roadies was going to have to do the announcements because Pete just couldn't handle it at the beginning. Eventually, I got physically sick. I got bronchial pneumonia, and the doctor advised me to clear out.
Anthony Phillips left, and so we had to make the decision. I mean, I originally thought, when Anthony, as I said before, I think Anthony was, I saw him as group leader in many ways. Certainly the most influential person in the group. And I thought when he left, we probably would split up, actually. And then we had a conversation. Mike and Pete were very keen to carry on. And Richard McPhail, who was our roadie but a good friend and a sort of a big fan and everything, said there's no way you must carry on. You know, you've really got something going here. So all these things came together, and we had a meeting, and we decided that you know, that we probably felt we could do better on the drums. You know, that we liked John and everything. He was good, but he wasn't. Just felt we could have someone more creative in the drum seat. So we had to make this decision, and so then we were just auditioning, you know, for a guitarist and a drummer.
Hunter caught sight of a tugboat in desire for conquest. He found himself with an lady not beheld before. Where are you, my father? Give wisdom to your son. And as his strength began to fail, he saw a shimmering lake, a shadow in the dark green depths, disturbed a strange tranquility. The waters are disturbed. Some creature has
I must have spent a fortune on these 1 and 6penny ads, you know, so I stuck one in that said, guitarist writer seeks receptive musicians determined to strive beyond existing stagnant music forms. And I thought, well, if that doesn't ring a bell with somebody, you know, I mean, at least I'll get someone who's idealistic, even if they're completely bonkers.
another's dream had been fulfilled at last, forever still beneath us.
There's something in the wording of it that made me curious. You know, a lot of the other guitarists we were coming across were into notes and flash and all that stuff. And Steve was into atmospheres. and that's what attracted us.
I felt, you know, the kind of delicate pastel shading acoustic aspect that the band did was very, very good. But then when the band was supposed to sort of rise into an area of some power, I felt that that was an area that I warmed to, the fact that, you know, there was some aggression in my playing that I felt I could put that stamp on it in a way.
Now, Steve was a classically influenced guitarist, and he was almost the architect of Genesis's more classical in-tone sound.
We did quite a few auditions, and I think so. I took a big role in that as a sort of drum fanatic, and obviously without Anthony, who was the other drum fanatic, we put ads in, went through all sorts, and I remember Phil impressed me because I think he said he played on a George Harrison session, and I thought, oh, that was very impressive, but I think he'd actually done sort of third tambourine. But anyway, we had a lot of people, including some, I think, really quite useful drummers. We did it at my parents' house, which is where Tony and I used to do a lot of writing, and we did some rehearsing. Mainly the rehearsals at that time, I think, were between my parents' house and Anthony's family's house. I suggested, I think, that we devise a series of tests because we didn't have long in an audition. I hate auditions anyway, but one of the problems with John is he was quite, once he got something, he could do it and deliver it well, but he was very slow learner. So when we wanted to try different arrangements, different grooves, different feels, it was a painful and really time-consuming process. So we thought, okay, we'll throw some different tests at these drummers and see how quickly people pick up these ideas. Phil arrived early, as he often does. He was the most punctual member of the band, always, but he was there with his mate Ronnie, and listening to the two other drummers, I think, run through these tests. So by the time he sat down, he knew it. As an ex-drummer, or still a part-time drummer, I knew just from the way he sat down in the saddle that he knew exactly what he was doing, just the way the body engages with the kit. It was clear that he could just lift the music. I think they always say a band is only as good as its drummer, and Phil is a great drummer.
Phil Collins auditioned for the role of drummer in Genesis, and he was successful. Now, he wasn't a public school boy like the others. He had been to stage school. He was, in fact, a child actor who had leaned towards drumming. And he brought them a certain earthy charm.
He sort of changed the tone of the band, in a sense, because he had these three upper-middle-class, rather serious-minded young men, and then you had this fourth, slightly laddish bloke who came in and hit the drums for them.
Waiting for you, come and join us now. We need you with us. Come and join us now.
Do you remember the first time you met Phil, and what was he like?
Very. You were
going to say cocky, weren't you?
He was cocky. So confident.
I thought this was this is not what I'm used to. I've never been anywhere like this before. And of course, they had the piano, grand piano out on the patio, There was a sunshade for you to put your drums underneath. There was a swimming pool, and I was early, as usual. And one of the guys said, why don't you just go and have a swim? Well, we've got 10 guys ahead of you, so why don't you just go and have a swim? So I went and had a swim. Meanwhile, I was listening to all the other guys audition, because it was open air, it was in the back garden. So by the time I came out to do my bit, I knew all the pieces, you know, I knew all the audition pieces. And I waltzed through it.
Where he sat down at the kit, I knew he was a good drummer before he played a note. To present.
The return of the cat of Wing!
The first thing I noticed was that no one was actually making the sound of a musical box, and I thought, God, you know, here's an opportunity for me. So I did this thing, recorded at half speed, which was a little guitar lick going. And so that was, you know, my chance to be the Sugar Plum Fairy, perhaps.
Mike started off with the first dring, ding, dring, 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 and you know, I was a big fan of The Who too, and I really wanted to try and persuade Mike to find something, you know, like a little Townsend arm-waving, you know, ballsy attacking section that we could add in there. And I think I was pushing very hard for that, and it was in the rooms in West Hampstead on the 28 bus route, and it was, I think, exciting when that sort of first came to gel as a piece. And I think my head at the time also was in this Victoriana world, which I pictured around the house my dad had grown up in, and so this sort of controlled English mental landscape under which festered, you know, violence and sex was the sort of flavor that I was trying to bring in to the lyrics and vocals.
And I want, and I feel, and I know, and I touch. That I may join with you. All your hearts will seem so far from me. They are in all our hearts silent. the present of a heartbeat to the riot
Unexpectedly, nursery crime entered the Italian top 10, forging a special relationship between Genesis and their Italian fans that has stretched to this day.
At the time, the album didn't sell particularly well, so it's only in retrospect, or it's only as an archive item that it became a heavy seller, apart from one territory, which was Italy.
Well, you folks agree with that one?
We like audiences that sit down and listen to the music rather than get drunk and pick up girls and...
Big ones.
Big ones. Bogo de Kazuna. Kazuki. We like audiences that sit down and listen to us.
And we like the words, the music, the arrangements, all democratic.
Yes,
oh yes, that's right. Yes, quite often. About 5, 6 or 10 times a week.
And in those days, no one really liked us, apart from the Italians, so the more time we could spend there, the better. The more we were cheered up.
Fantasy, I think.
Where do you take the inspiration? Dove trovate l'ispirazione per I vostri testi?
Well, the fantasy often comes...
Quasi sempre l'ispirazione ci viene dall'anima.
So what we do is we check out the reading of the song.
Di qui, dalla lettura dell'anima che ascoltiamo con un orecchio.
I think Foxtrot was, we were gaining confidence. You know, live was going very well at that point, even though, you know, financially things weren't good, but there was a great rapport building, and it was beginning to sort of move around other countries, and so I think we were confident in a way that we hadn't been before, and so that gave us the, if you like, mental platform on which to build something like Supper's Ready, which is still one of the things that I like best looking backwards.
Genesis had started to stir up an almost messianic fervour that pushed Peter to new performance heights. He began to develop his very individual stage persona. His visual creativity exploded over the band's next two albums, Nursery Crime and Foxtrot. Peter amazed the audience, and his fellow band members too, by bounding on stage in the red dress and Foxy's head illustrated on the album cover.
The first gig I remember of that tour was actually in a boxing ring in Dublin. It's not the sort of place one would normally expect to go and perform in a red dress, but it was. I remember just the moment when I walked out with this costume on, and there was a real sense of shock and horror in the audience, and I thought, oh, this is good. Try a bit more of this.
I thought it was quite useful in terms of getting more of stories told, getting more sort of emotion, getting some strangeness in the performance. And I know there were certain things, which are seen as a source of a lot of amusement now, but with Watcher of the Skies and the bat wings, and I was wearing UV makeup and holding sort of UV tubes and things, and there were things which at that time hadn't really been seen in a rock context. So there was a certain shock value. It seems impossible to conceive that would be shocking now. But walking on the stage in Ireland into this old boxing ring in a red dress, again was something that provoked a good reaction.
The other thing we discovered, obviously, was that as soon as when Pete went on stage in Dublin with wearing a red dress and a fox's head, that we ended up on the front page of Melody Maker. So this sort of said something to us, This is the first time we'd ever been noticed, And I think that kind of one thing led to another, and it sort of brought out a natural, because Pete is an introvert, really, and it was a way of, of appearing, I suppose. It's a way of getting over that stage problem. You go out there and you put on a costume and you act a part, and it works.
It's important to remember that in those days, PA systems were so lousy, no one heard a word that Peter sang most of the time. So in a sense, he was trying to act out some of the characters, which suited the lyrical, getting the lyrics across, worked with the music because it was quite dramatic in places, and developed into something that became quite a show.
Open your eyes, it's full of surprise. Everyone rises and picks in the rocks. And the musical box. Yes!
It did change the way the music press perceived us, and because music is very hard to describe, but when you've got a picture, and of course what happened as a result of that was the fact that Peter became the focus of the band, which at first I didn't think too much about. I was just glad that we were all getting somewhere, But I think long term we started to get a bit pissed off.
Sitting on, I turn the television off, sitting beside you. Brush back your hair and let me get to know your heart. Waiting here so long, and all this time passed me by. I've been waiting here so long. And all this time that passed me by. flower? Yes! There's mom and dad, good and bad, and everyone's happy to be here. There's Winston Churchill dressed in rag. He used to be a British flag. Plastic man, what a drag! The frog was a prince. The prince was a brick. Brick was an egg. The strong compression, my distortion shows obsession. If I keep self-control, I'll be safe in my soul. This child. Snakes are female face, the smallest motion will increase. Music, melodies, fill me going home. But there is no silent warning, and the silence call. Well, welcome, we are the love.
My name is Britannia. This is my song. It's called Dancing with the Moonlit Night.
Tell me where my country lies. Cried the uniform to his true love's eyes. It lies with me, cried the Queen of Maybe. For her merchandise, he traded in his price. Paper late, cried a voice in the crowd. Old man dies, the note he left was signed off Father Tennis. It seems he drowned, selling England by the pound. Citizens of it was 5-4, I'm being right.
Watcher of the Skies was a very important track to us, and although I think Tony was the sort of lead writer on that, with particularly the mellotron chords, and I did some work, I think, on the verses and chorus, but the vibe was sci-fi meets prog, I think.
Across the sitting room, I turn the television on.
I think Supper's Ready was, again, one of these journey songs where we really tried to take people into along this dream journey, and when it worked and we got to the sort of New Jerusalem stuff at the end, you could really feel people, you were touching people in quite a deep way, and it was there was a guy who'd been Edith Piaf's promoter in Paris. I remember when he heard Supper's Ready for the first time, he invited us to perform it at his church in Normandy. And this was a guy who didn't normally relate to rock music. It was more the sort of Piaf era and tradition. And there were things like that were sort of growing in the music, that sometimes you get a feeling and get an area that you could harvest in different ways, and I think capture people's imagination.
In order to get the kind of variety of sound we were looking for, it used to take us a very long time to set up between songs. And so we used to, when we first went on stage, have these sort of embarrassed silences.
And I used to go crazy because everyone would look at me as the front man in these long pauses while these guitarists were sort of endlessly twiddling their tuning devices.
So he'd start to tell stories, which sometimes are totally irrelevant to the song.
Within seconds, the entire clean, green, smooth surface of the park was a mass of dirty, brown, writhing objects. Old Michael continued to rub his flesh into the ground. This time he looked even happier, and he whistled a little tune. It went like this. Faster, Phil. This, to us, was perhaps Jerusalem boogie, but to the birds it meant supper is ready.
Social security took care. tells a tale.
Foxtrot is one of the standout prog rock records, a much maligned genre, but certainly one of the more exciting records of that genre. I mean, it's got things like the last track, Supper's Delight, which is over 25 minutes long. Certainly indulgent.
They weren't following trends, they were setting them. And that album was the epitome of early Genesis.
There's always been Ethel.
The figure in the red dress and the fox head that featured on the sleeve became a costume that lead singer Peter Gabriel took to the stage.
Mike Rutherford, Tony Banks, Steve Hackett, and to an extent Phil Collins were not natural performers. So it fell to the singer, Peter Gabriel, to carry these live shows. He did this essentially by dressing up like some kind of am-dram aficionado. So you saw him in these fantastic outfits. He dressed as Britannia. He had my particular favourite, where he seemed to dress as a sunflower.
He was very flamboyant, a performer, basically. And I think my favourite outfit of his was when he kind of dressed up as the cover of Foxtrot and he's wearing kind of a dress and a fox's head. Apparently the rest of the band didn't know he was going to do this before he kind of went out and did it, so that must have been quite a shock for them.
A flower? You go down to Willow Farm to look for butterflies, butterflies. Open your eyes, it's full of surprise. Everyone rises the fox in the rocks.